Snow still clung to the ridges that spring morning when the mountain man came down from the high pass. His name was Boone Carver, a drifter wrapped in bear hide, beard full of frost, eyes like smoke and storm clouds. He'd been alone for months, hunting, trading, surviving on roots and silence. The world had hardened him, until hunger did what no bullet ever could, bring him to his knees. By noon he reached a half-ruined cabin at the edge of a small clearing. Thin smoke rose from a crooked chimney, the kind that promised warmth but not plenty. Boone hesitated, one hand on his rifle. Then he smelled it, fresh bread, faint but real. He hadn't tasted bread in weeks. He knocked once. The door opened to a child no taller than his waist. A girl of maybe 10, hair the color of wheat, wearing a patched wool dress too big for her. She looked up at him without fear, though she could see he was starving. "You look like you ain't eaten," she said simply. Boone swallowed hard. "Ain't had nothin' fit to eat in days." She studied him, then stepped aside. "Mama's gone to town for flour. But I got one loaf left." From the table she lifted a small piece of bread, still warm, wrapped in cloth. She tore it in half and handed him the larger piece. "You can have this." Boone stared at her. He'd met plenty of grown men who'd shoot another soul for less. This child, thin, barefoot, alone, was offering him her last food. "I can't take that," he said. "You'll go hungry." "I'll be fine," she answered softly. "You look like you needed more." His hand shook as he took it. The crust was rough, the inside soft, and when he bit into it, it felt like mercy. The girl watched him eat with quiet satisfaction, then smiled faintly. "Mama says kindness always comes back," she murmured. When the bread was gone, Boone tried to thank her, but words failed. He left before the snow melted, ashamed that he had nothing to give. Yet all the way up the ridge, her small voice followed him through the wind, "Kindness always comes back." That night, in his camp high above the valley, Boone couldn't sleep. He kept seeing her, bare feet on the cold floor, small hands breaking bread. He'd been a man who owed no one and trusted nothing. But that night, he decided he owed her. By dawn he was already heading down again. When he reached the clearing, he saw smoke rising thick and black. His heart dropped. The cabin was gone, burned to ash. He ran, shouting her name, until his throat bled in the cold air. Then he heard it, a cough, faint, behind the stump of a fallen tree. The girl lay there, wrapped in a singed blanket, eyes wide with shock. Boone dropped to his knees beside her. "What happened?" "Men came," she whispered. "They wanted Mama's mule. She fought them." She pointed weakly toward the ruins. "They burned it all." Boone looked toward the charred remains of the cabin, jaw tight, eyes blazing. He lifted her gently into his arms. "You ain't stayin' here," he said. "Not alone." He carried her up the trail to his camp, built her a shelter of pine boughs, fed her the last of his jerky. She barely ate, but when he tucked his coat around her, she smiled weakly. "You came back," she whispered. Boone nodded once. "You fed me, little one. Now I feed you." The fire crackled softly as the mountain wind pushed through the pines. Boone sat beside the girl, watching her small chest rise and fall beneath the blanket. The sky above them turned gray with coming snow. He'd seen plenty of storms, but this one felt colder. Maybe because this time, he wasn't alone. He looked down at her face, smudged with ash, and whispered, "You hang on, kid. Ain't nobody talkin', the only good thing left in this world." He stayed by her all night, feeding the fire with broken branches and bits of his old traps. At dawn, he made up his mind. He couldn't save her alone. He'd have to go down to the valley, to the miners, the farmers, the men who still remembered what it was like to have daughters of their own. He wrapped her up in his heavy coat and left her in the shelter, with a note carved into a plank beside her, "I'll be back. Don't be scared." Then he strapped on his rifle and started down the mountain. It took him 6 hours to reach the valley town of Clear Creek, a rough cluster of saloons, barns, and weather-beaten faces. The first man who saw him nearly dropped his pipe. "Boone Carver," he said, "thought you'd gone half wild up there." Boone didn't answer. He walked straight into the saloon, slammed his hand on the counter, and said, "I need men. Not for gold, for something better." The room went quiet. He told them everything. About the girl who'd shared her last piece of bread. About how she'd saved his life without knowing his name. About the men who burned her home to the ground. His voice never shook, but his eyes burned with the kind of fury that made other men look away. When he finished, silence hung heavy. Then an old miner stood up. "You say she gave you her last bread. Boone nodded. The man spat, set down his drink, and said, "Then hell, reckon it's time someone gave her something back." By sundown, word had spread through Clear Creek and beyond. Blacksmiths left their forges, ranchers rode down from the hills. Even the preacher brought his shovel. When Boone looked up from his saddle that evening, a line of men stretched from the valley all the way up the trail, carpenters, hunters, farmers, each carrying tools, planks, and food. 100 men, maybe more. They followed Boone up the mountain without question. When they reached the clearing, some stopped and took off their hats at the sight of the burned cabin. The little girl was awake now, wrapped in Boone's coat, her eyes wide as she saw the army of strangers gathering around her. What's all this?" she asked weakly. Boone knelt beside her and smiled for the first time in years. "You gave what you had," he said. "Now the mountain gives back." Within minutes, the clearing rang with the sound of hammers, saws, and laughter. Men cut timber, dragged stones, and built with a kind of fire that only decency could spark. They worked until the moon rose over the peaks, and by morning, a new cabin stood where the old one had burned, a sturdy home of pine and stone, smoke already curling from its chimney. The girl stood in the doorway, leaning on Boone's arm, eyes shining with disbelief. "It's for me," she whispered. "For you," Boone said, "and for every soul that ever went hungry but still shared what they had." Tears rolled down her cheeks as one of the miners placed a small loaf of bread in her hands, fresh, warm, steaming in the cold air. She broke it in half and handed one piece to Boone. "Mama said kindness always comes back," she said softly. Boone's throat tightened. He nodded. She was right. The men stayed that night, singing old songs by the fire, passing bread and whiskey, laughing like brothers. Boone sat apart, watching the girl eat, the glow of the flames dancing on her face. For the first time in years, he felt something he'd forgotten existed, peace. And when morning came, the 100 men rode away, leaving behind a new cabin, a small garden, and a mountain man who'd found his reason to keep living.